Well, good morning, friends. Pastor Sara, if I haven't had a chance to meet you. Man, but how was your summer? Man, good, yeah. Thanks for sharing a bit about that with each other and the welcome question. Apparently, it's September now. Did you know this? Apparently that has happened. And here we are. School has started for most. You could feel the air shift this week. Jim Anderson made that comment yesterday at our council retreat. He's like, you can feel like things are changing. And pumpkin spice is here, yeah. True confessions, who has had some pumpkin spice already? I'm one of those people. Okay, great. Okay, yeah, okay, I see you, yeah. So fall has flung, or at least it's beginning to fling, yes? Yeah, so what we have done here on our summer vacation together here at Salt House, we've been making good progress through the Gospel of Mark. We've witnessed Jesus healing and casting out demons, building a team of 12 apostles whom he sends out. And we've seen him using parables to teach. He has calmed a storm. He breaks the rules of the temple and the Sabbath and on fasting. And he intentionally gets tangled up with sinners and those who are on the fringes of society. And in our latest story 2 weeks ago, Jesus sends a legion of demons from a possessed man into 2,000 pigs that then tumble into the sea. Pretty great. I mean, action-packed, right? Yeah. Which leads us to where we are this morning in the middle of Mark chapter 5. Dun, dun, dun. So does some of this sound familiar? Have you been able to keep track of all of these sermons? Have you been listening, even if you've been on vacation, maybe? But through all this, we've had some phenomenal preachers this summer, yes? Yes, Liz Culver, John LeMunyon, Kaylee Hagan, Kimberly Janis, Terry Kylo, also me. But thank you all. It's just been such good stuff. So please go and listen to those sermons if you did miss them. Learn more about this Gospel of Mark, this biography of Jesus that we are immersed in together. So friends, welcome as we stumble back in from summer, right? As summer is dwindling. And I just want to say welcome back to this gospel, to each other, and where we're getting to know this Jesus and the kingdom of God. So Today, we have two stories that we're going to look at. One actually interrupts in the middle of the first, one story inside of the other story, in what theologians sometimes call, that's right, a Markan sandwich. Highly technical term, I know. So this story sandwich, like this, it happens a few times in Mark's gospel, and in these sandwiches, the flavor of the outer story adds zest to the inner one, and the taste of the inner story is meant to in turn to permeate the outer one as well. So for us today, the outer story is about Jairus, one of the local synagogue presidents in Capernaum, and particularly his 12-year-old daughter. And the inner story is about a much older woman who, for the same 12 years, right, connections, she has suffered from constant bleeding, likely a hemorrhage in her uterus. So as we read, I'm going to read it. I invite you to just imagine these scenes unfolding and just see what jumps out to you, okay? It's a rather long text, two stories. So here we go. Mark chapter 5, 21 through 43. Jesus crossed over once more in the boat to the other side. There a large crowd gathered around him, and he was by the seashore. One of the synagogue presidents, a man named Jairus, arrived. When he saw Jesus, he fell down at his feet. My daughter's going to die, he pleaded. Please come, lay your hands on her, rescue her, and let her live. Jesus went off with them. A large crowd followed and pressed in on him. A woman who had had constant bleeding for 12 years heard about Jesus. She'd had a rough time at the hands of one doctor after another. She'd spent all she had on treatment and had got worse rather than better. She came up in the crowd behind Jesus and touched his clothes. If I can just touch his clothes, she said to herself, I'll be rescued. At once, her flow of blood dried up. She knew in her body that her illness was cured. Jesus knew at once, inside himself, that power had gone out of him. He turned around in the crowd and said, who touched my clothes? You see this crowd crushing you, said the disciples, and you say, who touched me? He looked around to see who had done it. a woman came up. She was afraid and trembling, but she knew what had happened to her. She fell down in front of him and told him the whole truth. "My daughter," Jesus said to her, "your faith has rescued you. Go in peace, be healed from your illness." As he said this, someone arrived from the synagogue president's house. "Your daughter's dead," he said. "Why bother the teacher anymore?" Jesus overheard the message. "Don't be afraid," he said to the synagogue president. "Just believe." Jesus didn't let anyone go with him except Peter, James, and James's brother John. They arrived at the synagogue president's house and saw a commotion with a lot of weeping and wailing. Jesus went inside. "Why are you making such a fuss?" Jesus said. Why all this weeping? The child isn't dead. She's asleep." And they laughed at him. Jesus put them all out. Then he took the child's father and mother and his companions, and they went into where the child was. He took hold of her hand and said to her, "Talitha kum," which means, "Time to get up, little girl." At once, the girl got up and walked about. She was 12 years old. They were astonished, out of their wits. Then Jesus commanded them over and over not to let anyone know about it and told them to give her something to eat. Here ends our story sandwich. You see it, right? The sandwich that's there, one story inside of the other. Both stories on their own would be a sermon in themselves. But again, Mark is doing something here by holding the stories together in this sandwich. And so we're going to pay attention to the fact that that's how they're presented and see how these two stories connect and draw out deeper meaning and deeper flavor because they are told together in this tasty sandwich. You with me? You up for a story sandwich? Awesome. All right, so let's start with Jairus, the synagogue president. So he's the president in a town of a few hundred folks, so it's not that prestigious of a position, but still important, right? So it's a small town. He's a religious insider. He's likely well-dressed, well-respected, and likely not a fan of Jesus. For as we know, Jesus, he's been in Capernaum for a while now, and what Jesus has been doing is a nuisance and upsetting for the local experts in Jewish law. But when his 12-year-old daughter is dying, none of that matters anymore, right? So Jairus, for him, the only thing that matters is his daughter. So he throws himself down at Jesus' feet. It's not dignified. What will people say about him later, right? Just pure desperation. So we can feel that raw pain of this father and his fear of losing his daughter, right? So we feel that. Jesus goes with them, and it wouldn't have been far in this small town before they reached Jairus' home. So that's happening, but before they get there, there's an interruption. Story number 2, the middle of the sandwich. So this woman, she's on the other end of the power spectrum from Jairus. Not only is she physically weak from constant bleeding, no iron supplement to take at that time, am I right? But she's lost everything. The money on doctors, she's lost community because to continue bleeding is to be ceremonially unclean under Jewish law, which means no synagogue worship for her. She not only can't touch anyone, she needs to stay 6 feet away from them. She's likely living alone outside of Capernaum. So as we chew on this Markan story sandwich, the first thing for us to notice that connects these two that I'll pull out is the theme of rescue. Notice how when Jairus asks Jesus to come to his house, it's so that his daughter may be rescued, right? Or saved. Come and she will be rescued. Then we hear it again as the woman says to herself, if I can only touch his clothes, I'll be rescued. These two stories sandwiched together, they add flavors for us about the tastes of the kingdom of God and its flavor of the rescue that the kingdom of God is bringing in the lives of these folks through Jesus. Rescue for folks who absolutely need rescue. So as we keep seeing more and more about what God's kingdom is, this is just another piece that Mark pulls back the veil for us to see, this rescue. We'll see more about this kind of rescue thing in a few minutes, but that's the first thing we kind of pull out. Second, I want you to notice the parallel flavors in the stories of being unclean, right? Being unacceptable, impure, just Unacceptable. So Jesus is on his way to a house where he will find a corpse, which brings with it the threat of impurity, since contact with a dead body is one of the chief sources of impurity in Jewish purity codes. And then, of course, the woman who shows up bearing, as we said, one of the other main causes of impurity, which is bodily discharges and those who have them. So for both of them, we see that parallel, this kind of unacceptable condition that they are in, their impurity. But what's remarkable is that also in both stories, Jesus is not scandalized by their uncleanness, right? Right. Yeah. And when the woman explains, as the text says, she tells him everything. She tells him all that of what has happened. Like, he knows she was bleeding, right? And that she reached out and touched him. And there's no recoiling, there's no rebuking, like, oh my gosh, what did you do? In fact, it's the very opposite, right? Jesus, in response to her impurity, to her unacceptability, and in touching him, which is against temple law, he calls her my daughter. My daughter, your faith has rescued you. Go in peace, be healed from your illness. And again, he says, your faith has rescued you. There's that language of rescue again. So this parallels then Jesus' response to Jairus' daughter. They arrive at Jairus' home, and the professional mourners are already there, weeping loudly. They are hired to go and grieve loudly so that family can too, right? They're there to be like, we're here to grieve. Let's do this. So as Jesus takes the parents and the 3 disciples alone into the room, they're in the presence of a dead body with the threat of impurity. Not only does Jesus not avoid it, right? But he is the one this time who reaches out a hand to grab hold of the one who society has dubbed as unclean and unacceptable. He says, Talitha cum, which sounds a little bit like abracadabra. And you know what I mean? Like, it's like, Talitha cum, like it feels a little bit like a magic word, right? But the text tells us, well, we will, this is the original Aramaic. This is what Jesus would have actually said in the language that he was speaking. And the text tells us Talitha cum simply means time to get up, little girl. Or even another way to say is, beloved one, rise. I wonder why Jesus' words are left untranslated, right? We get this little Aramaic moment. And it's curious. And I would imagine that the scene and those words made such a deep impression on Peter and the others that whenever they told the story afterwards, they kept the tender words as they were because it touched them so. Like, they weren't magic words. They were ordinary words one might use to wake up a sleeping child. So she probably heard these words from her parents every day. They were filled with tenderness and fondness. So in both stories, Jesus isn't scandalized by their impurity, and he does the shocking thing by reaching out, and he displays such tenderness and presence in response to what others would deem unacceptable, yes? So it's like unacceptable, but as being unacceptable as a place of intimacy. Like, their impurities become the places of being known and met by Jesus with such kindness and even intimacy, right? My daughter, and get up, little one. In both of these stories, in response to uncleanness, wow, right? This is some good sandwich flavor, yeah? Yeah. All right, third question. As you think about these 2 stories unfolding, what is the emotion that's there for both Jairus and the woman? Like, what are they feeling? Despair. I think that's a good one. Others? Hopeless. Desperation. I think the biggest one is fear, actually. So they're feeling all these things. But I want to talk about fear because the woman, after she is healed, the text says she is afraid and trembling. And this is on top of certainly being afraid even before the healing, right? She's afraid because she shouldn't have been there, right? She would get in trouble. She shouldn't have touched Jesus or anybody. And now that she has, and she has been healed, people will know and she's going to have to confess to it. So she's afraid of those consequences. And of course, we understand Jairus' fear, the raw terror of potentially losing his child, right? He reaches out to Jesus, maybe the last guy he'd want to reach out to for help because of his desperate terror and fear. So as I've spent time in this sandwich, in these two stories this week, I've been thinking a lot about fear. I think I've learned a lot about fear in the last few years, about trauma, worry, anxiety, terror, my own and others, especially those that I love and are closest to me. But one of the most surprising to me things that I've learned about fear is that you can't think your way out of fear, right? You can't reason your way out of it. You can't even necessarily talk your way out of it when you're afraid and anxious. And if you're someone who knows anxiety pretty well, you can't just be like, well, it'll be okay. You can't just do that, right? I have an undergraduate degree in psychology, and I'm just such a proponent of therapy, psychoanalysis, talk therapy. I've had so much of it in my own life. I think it is so valuable, and it helps us reflect on our lives. Healing and breakthrough happen there in those conversations. Yes? You guys experience that? Yeah. And also, what has been newer to me is how fear is a somatic experience, right? Fear is in our bodies. And I think most of us know this now because there's so much conversation now, thankfully, about the fight, flight, freeze, fawn responses. And even just that we talk about how trauma and fear are physical, embodied experiences that our bodies hold beyond the thoughts that are just in our head, right? And how the way we often move through fear and anxiety, one way that we can heal and address it is by actually taking action, changing the behavior. Through cognitive behavioral therapy, folks familiar with this, where you actually do the things. And this is the way that cognitive behavioral therapy works. There are 3 things connected within us: the interplay of our thoughts, our emotions, and our behaviors. And they're so tightly connected and affect one another. So to address what we're feeling or what we're thinking, one way to do this is actually to take action, and then that will change the way that we feel or the way that we think. So that's very loose description of CBT. But we see, which I've seen to be very, very true in my life and life of my children. And as we see connections, I think they're also here in this text, the fear of this woman and the fear in Jairus. Of course, they weren't intentionally doing CBT, right? Therapy. Yeah, what we see in them is that they don't try to think or talk or reason their way out of their fear and desperation. They choose to act. And it is an act of faith. As Mark pulls back the veil for us on what the kingdom of God is like here among us, he's showing us what this rescue can look like. The kind of rescue that meets us in our decade of pain or an illness, or in the ways that we feel unacceptable, or in the face of our deepest fears of losing what matters most to us. In the face of our fears, we see another sandwich theme. Another theme that's cooked into both stories of the sandwich is the theme of faith and fear together. And how Jesus says to the woman, your faith has rescued you. Go in peace. And how he says to Jairus, after the news of his daughter's death has been delivered, Jesus says, don't be afraid, just believe. Fear and faith kind of meeting in those moments, right? And neither of these statements or Jesus' words aren't intended to change their mind, but inspire their actions of faith. Jesus acknowledging the woman's faith is an acknowledgement of the action that she has already taken, the action of faith, moving through her fear as she dares to reach out and touch him. Faith as action. So it is with Jairus. He dares to throw himself on the ground in front of the rabbi he has despised, to reach out from that place of fear and desperation and take action, an embodiment of that fear he dares to have in the face of fear. Y'all, this story sandwich is showing us so much of what faith looks like. In the kingdom of God, faith isn't the thing we conjure up out of a place of strength. It isn't even about how we think and see and understand things necessarily. Belief isn't just a mental exercise. I know many of us have lived through and are living through seasons of faith deconstruction. And the tricky thing with that is to not let ourselves just get stuck in tearing it all down, just keep tearing it all down and tear it all down, or just keep standing in the rubble of it all, right? We need to make time for both of those things. But I think what can keep us stuck is often fear, right? I think it also can be our efforts to get it all straight in our heads first, to make sense of it, to like reason our faith into existence so that we don't have to get hurt again or we don't have to go through this again. We want to figure it out. And this even, I think, applies to faith in a broader sense, so including actual faith and spirituality, what we believe in that sense, but also our faith placed in hoping for healing or breakthrough in our lives. Like to have faith in what could be, to hope. I've talked with many of y'all in our church who don't know if you should dare to hope or have faith in something again, whether it's Jesus or whether you're hoping for a particular change in your life or in our world. There's this desire to like get it all, like I just need to get it sorted. And I get that desire to get it figured out. We see it often here at Salt House that love is a verb, right? Yes. And it also is true that faith is a verb. Faith is action, and those actions can be the things that can interrupt those places that we're going to be stuck in, the thinking patterns and the feeling patterns like fear. So as you chew on this, please do, I want to note that real talk, like this story sandwich is powerful. Like, oh my gosh, look at these healings. This is a beautiful story. Look at the connections, but also it can sting because these are two, they reach out and Jairus' daughter is raised and the woman is healed. But some of us have prayed for healing and got silence. Some of us have taken action in faith. We've reached out to Jesus and did not get what we hoped for. So this story sandwich can also raise questions of, cool, like, but why them and why not me? Or why not my child? Why not my diagnosis? Why not my community, right? And I don't know why, right? But I do know that in the Gospels, we are witnessing a larger story. Just as Jesus wasn't coming to be a one-man liberation movement in like the traditional, he's going to lead an army to victory sense, right? He also wasn't coming to be a one-man emergency medical center. These moments of healing in Mark, they are signposts that point us towards something bigger, which is a world being made new, right? Where yes, there's no illness, brokenness, pain, and those signposts of those things, like they will lead to Jesus' own death that will defeat death, not just once for one person, but once for all. So these signposts, they are so important for us to pay attention to. They're telling us what the kingdom of God is like, but signposts also, they reveal what's to come, but they are not the final destination, right? That's also why Jesus tells them in our text, don't tell anyone, right? He does a lot of shushing in Mark's gospel. Like, I know this happened, but keep it down, down low. But he does that because, again, this isn't a magic trick. It's resistance. And it's dangerous. Because when people start believing that even death isn't final, empires get nervous. When the unacceptable are treated as beloved, systems of power tremble. Yeah? And this is the world that Jesus invites us into. I don't know why our prayers are not always answered the way that we want them to be. But I also know that sometimes they are. And we all get to keep experiencing those signposts, pointing to them together, these signs of Jesus' presence in our lives, this kingdom of God, this way of our world being made new. So I'm going to invite us into some kind of responding to all of this that we've heard. The band can kind of come up and get set as they get us ready to sing. Okay, so we've just heard this story of two people who came to Jesus with fear. You can call it anxiety, worry, desperation, even disappointment and hopelessness. They came with fear and they came with need, deep, raw, and real need. And Jesus met them right there. Not because they had it worked out, but because they reached out, right? Faith as a verb. So now I just want to invite us into a moment of response, a moment of just living this faith as a verb. So I would just ask you to take a breath and just quietly ask yourself, what's one thing I long for Jesus to meet me in today? What's one thing I long for Jesus to meet me in today? Just kind of like your one prayer for today. And maybe it's fear. What are you afraid of? Maybe it's a place of grief or shame or uncertainty. Maybe it's the thing that's been holding you back. Maybe it's a hope you've been afraid to name out loud. But whatever it is, I invite you to just hold it before God and really just to reach out with it. Like that's faith. To hold it before God. And if it helps, like close your eyes, many of you already are. Take a breath. You may want to whisper your prayer under your breath, just like one sentence. But I want you to take your time with this. We're going to start singing, and then in the moment, I'm going to pop back up here and we're going to carry these prayers of ours into a time of prayer together. What is one thing that you long for Jesus to meet you in today?